Well, thank you very much, and thanks for the warm invitation to the Kingdom. It is a sensitive time, but I think it's also an exciting time. I think you can feel the winds of change through Saudi Arabia with all of the reform agenda that His Royal Highness the Crown Prince is pushing through, leading through. I had a chance to talk with him today about that, as well as with His Royal Highness Prince Faisal, and I will be seeing later His Royal Highness Prince Khalid. And so there are huge opportunities. I think opportunities for our bilateral relationship between the United Kingdom and Saudi Arabia to do more trade, to do more business, particularly I think in some of the innovative sectors of the future, which will create the well-paid jobs of the future. But there are also challenges, and they range from the traditional threats that we share and are concerned about in relation to Iran. We're liaising very closely with our Saudi partners on the progress on talks in Vienna in relation to the JCPOA. And there are new threats like misinformation threats from cyber, which can come from hostile states or criminal gangs. But in all of these areas, I think the steadfast, dependable, constant relationship between Britain and Saudi Arabia will give us a real edge in both grasping the opportunities but also mitigating the threats. So I actually feel excited about the opportunities ahead, and we've just got to make sure we grasp them. Well, of course, and there's great travel between the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the United Kingdom. And look, I think the opportunities are broad-ranging. We've got the opportunity to promote a free trade deal through the Gulf Cooperation Council. I think that's particularly interesting given the innovation and the tech that both our countries and peoples are pioneering. I think that there are huge opportunities for greater cultural and social mixing. We have a lot of Saudi students in the UK and a lot of interest from the British people in what's going on in Saudi Arabia. There's also a whole force for good agenda, from tackling climate change and the work that's being done here on renewable technologies, through to our shared interests born of both our values but also our strategic interests in what's going on in the Horn of Africa, and trying to make sure that that part of the region is stable, prosperous, because we want to alleviate some of the humanitarian suffering there, but also because we see our own interests reflected there. In all of these areas, I think we could have no stronger partner based on not just our history but our future interests and scope for collaboration than with Saudi Arabia, and indeed other partners with whom we are like-minded. Well, look, Vision 2030 is bold, it's ambitious. We understand the desire of the Crown Prince and the Saudi people to build up their innovative technological industrial base, and I think a partner like the UK can contribute to that. We do business with integrity, we invest with integrity, we can make investments supported by the relevant finance, and we constantly look for a win-win approach with all of our trading partners, but particularly with a long-standing ally like Saudi. There's also the whole defence relationship. We've got the Carrier Strike Group, an aircraft carrier that's coming out to the region and will be making stops in Saudi. I think that there's a huge we've got a huge tradition of traditional military defence cooperation, but as I mentioned, there are all the new areas and the new threats that we're very focused on because of, if you like, our assessment of where the threats of the future are going to come from. And cyber security and making sure that our governments and our people are resilient to cyber attacks is another really interesting area of cooperation. So from traditional maritime cooperation to cyber security and cyber resilience, again, from trade to defence, I think the relationship is in good shape, but we can take it to the next level. Well, we're focused on the whole range of threats. We engaged in talks in Vienna in relation to the nuclear issue. We're very clear Iran must never be allowed to acquire nuclear capability for military purposes and must return to full compliance with the JCPOA. And indeed, we are looking at the scope to go, as it's termed, longer and stronger in relation to the requirements that are placed on Iran. But there's also all of the other destabilizing activity in Yemen, in Iraq as well, in Syria. And we've got to be very clear, working with our allies, working with those host governments, that we will minimize the space for that destabilizing activity and hold Iran to account for its behavior. There's also issues around freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz. In all of these areas, I think it's important we stand up for our values, but also our interests, and we take a very rigorous approach. And Saudi will find the UK steadfast ally in that respect, but also capable of using our diplomacy to broaden the number of countries that are willing to stand up and be counted on these important issues. Because it's not just something like the Straits of Hormuz, freedom of navigation, the nuclear issue. They're not just issues in relation to Iran, but they are the bedrock of the international rules-based system. And so we've got to stand up for that system. If not, we'll find it not just creaking in relation to the Middle East, but all around the world. And so we have a vested stake, a joint stake, a shared interest in the values that underpin that international system, and we should stand up for the rules-based approach, whether it's on freedom of navigation or preventing the proliferation of nuclear weapons. You have to do it through a combination of diplomacy, obviously making sure that we have the abilities to defend ourselves in the last analysis, but these problems will only be resolved through diplomacy and holding to account Iran or any other country for its nefarious activities and be willing to apply cost. And that's the approach the UK takes. We take it with our allies, and we listen very carefully in all of these areas to the views of our Saudi partners. Well, we deplore the Houthi attacks on civilians, and we call for all sides to respect the ceasefire. Of course, the Houthis need to be pressed hard to come to the negotiating table. They need to be held to account for what they're doing, particularly the deplorable actions that you described. We need to apply a cost if they're not willing to do so. At the same time, the door for diplomacy must be left ajar, because ultimately that conflict will require a resolution by negotiation if it's going to create a lasting peace. That's difficult, it's inherently thorny, complex, but it is those two sides, the application and imposition of costs and leaving the door, the diplomatic door ajar, which is the only way through. And we want to narrow the space for the aggressive, nefarious behavior, whether it's the Houthis or other Iranian proxies, but also show that there's a better path that can lead to a more sustainable peace where the interests of all the people, in this case Yemen, can be protected and preserved, and actually bring an end to that conflict and all the heartache and loss that it's caused to the people of Yemen. Well, we've already had a huge amount of cooperation, for example, on the repatriation of our nationals, making sure that flights could run between the countries, particularly at the start of the pandemic. We collaborate on public health awareness and how we tackle the virus, and we're always willing to work with our Saudi friends on every aspect of that, whether it's the test and trace to the rollout of vaccine programs. We're all, of course, trying to vaccinate our own people. We're making progress on that. Once we've done that, we'll be in a position to share excess supply, and we'll obviously look very carefully at the balance between the support we give to COVAX, which provides vaccines to the poorest countries around the world, but also to our ability to support strategic partners, and of course Saudi would be one of those. We're in a constant state of sharing information, whether it's technical information or logistical information. For example, the rollout of the vaccine programs. They require not just the vaccines and the vials and the needles, but also a huge logistical exercise. And in all of these areas, certainly the UK is very open to sharing the experience that we've had. We've made significant progress. We'll have every adult vaccinated by the end of July, we hope, and we're on course to do. And also, of course, we've got quite a lot of experience through our genomic sequencing to assess the risk and the threat placed by the variants to the virus, which we're all a bit worried about, because we're trying to track what impact they have on the transmission of the virus, but also on the efficacy of the vaccines. In all of these areas, of course, we want to make sure that all of our key partners, and indeed through global cooperation, we can all get through this, because we're not going to be safe from this pandemic until we're all safe. So that's a cardinal principle of the approach we're taking, the international leadership we're taking. You'll see this very much from my Prime Minister as we go through the G7 Leaders Summit next week in Cornwall in the UK. No, I think we've really got to shift the dial on climate change. I think that's what the young people of all our countries expect. Time is running out to do something about it, to mitigate the worst impacts from climate change. But if you take the relationship between Saudi Arabia and the United Kingdom, I think it shows you the kind of ethos and approach strategically we need to take, which is to start talking about the innovation of the future. Saudi, like the UK, has got a comparative advantage in renewable technology, particularly solar and wind, and that's the way, by pioneering, innovating, strengthening, improving those renewable sources, that we can transition to a sustainable, greener future, but in a way that increases livelihoods, creates the well-paid jobs of the future, and stimulates the economies rather than holds them back. So I think the example of Saudi is really important. We're encouraging all our key partners to come to COP26 in Glasgow in November with maximum ambition. We've got to hit those targets for nationally determined contributions to get emissions down, and we need all the leaders in all the regions around the world to really step up to the plate, and I'm sure Saudi Arabia will do, and we've got every chance if we all show the leadership that the world and the young people around the world expect of us. We've really got an opportunity to shift the dial on climate change, to control the temperatures, to prevent them increasing above 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is the real test, and above all, to create the path of innovative, job-creating technologies for the future, which is the only way that we'll tackle this problem at a global level. I think the green initiatives announced by the Crown Prince are critical. I was learning today and asking about the approaches that the government is taking in relation to solar power, in relation to wind power. You've got huge comparative advantages geographically in terms of renewables, and we're keen, interested to work with Saudi Arabia and other countries around the world to try and promote those and to try and press them and to create opportunities for businesses to invest in them. That's the way we get the win-win of an energy policy, if you like, that makes environmental as well as economic good sense. It's going to involve transition. We recognise that, particularly for a country with a history of oil and gas in the way that Saudi has. But nonetheless, I think it's really important and valuable that Saudi is also leading the way in relation to the renewable technologies of the future. Because again, as I say, that's what our young people, the populations of Saudi and the United Kingdom expect of us. So we've got to show that leadership, and come November, we've got to bring the world together, bring countries together with a viable path forward that, as I say, creates the jobs of the future, but also leaves our environment in a better state for future generations.